Details in the case of the American girl in Italy convicted of killing her roommate during what was described at the time as a drug-fueled sex game. That was 3 years ago. A court in Italy today, at long last, rejected a prosecutor's request for more DNA testing on the murder weapon. Lawyers for the woman seen here, Foxy Noxy, trying to get the court to toss out the DNA evidence that helped convict her, claiming there was possible contamination. One prosecutor has predicted the court could free Amanda Knox at the end of this month. He says, and I quote, "There is an ill wind blowing in this case. The judge and his assistant are clearly against us. I can see both Knox and Solicito, who was another person, a boyfriend of sorts who was being held at the time, who is being freed, which will be a shame," end quote. The Fox Sports chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt with the news in our New York City newsroom. Why did the prosecution want to retest this DNA again for the viewers who don't yet know?
Well, basically, Shep, because their original DNA testing had been called into question by court-appointed experts during this appeal hearing. Those court-appointed experts said that the testing on evidence such as the knife that prosecutors said was the actual murder weapon was contaminated. They believed that there was also not enough DNA to draw any specific conclusions from it on that knife. So they said the DNA testing by the prosecution was simply not good enough. So the prosecution said, let's do it all again. The judge said, no, we have your arguments. We have our court-appointed experts now. Retesting would be superfluous. Clear blow to the prosecution.
What about this statement that Amanda Knox could be freed by the end of the month? Anything to that, as far as you know?
Yeah, a lot to that. We get closing arguments in this appeal hearing now scheduled for September 23rd, and the judge is expected to rule pretty quickly after that. So certainly Amanda Knox and her family hope she'll be on her way back home to Seattle pretty soon. Listen to her father.
We're very hopeful, based upon, the results that we'll hopefully get to take Amanda home, but, you never can tell. It's up to the court, and they have to decide.
Amanda Knox's family obviously will be in court when that decision is announced, as will the family of Meredith Kircher, the murdered British student. Shep, obviously for them, this is a very difficult time too.
Jonathan Hunt, live in New York City. Jonathan, thank you. And Jonathan's chatting away about this story and others throughout the hour, including our breaking news at foxnews.com/Shep. Just click on the Hunt link on the right-hand side of the page, and Jonathan will be there. It'll be awesome. Let's get to our panel now. Joining us is the former prosecutor and Fox News legal analyst Arthur Aidala and the criminal defense attorney Randy Zelin. Well, what they've been saying all along is it didn't happen this way. That these Italians over there were stacked against her, that this was largely a political thing, that the evidence never existed, that Amanda Knox was being railroaded in this thing. They might have done something weird with some sex or something, but she didn't murder anybody. Or that's what they're saying.
It's an absolutely brilliant closing argument. That's what happened. Now, keeping in mind that there is a young woman who's dead and parents who don't have a daughter, let's now focus in on the evidence. And the reality here is you have questions as to whether they even had the right murder weapon. This case was built on the DNA evidence, which now a court, not a defense expert, court-appointed experts have come in and said, you've got to be kidding me. It ain't here. This woman's going to be home by Thanksgiving.
They took the entire summer off in this case, as apparently Italians are wont to do. The entire summer off, and they're letting this young American woman rot in an Italian jail while the court gets around to the fact that the DNA evidence can't be used anymore. What is wrong with these people?
I'll outrage you a little more, Shep. That's the second time it's happened to her. It happened to her during the regular trial. When she was the first trial, this summer recess, the judges recessed for summer. And then they did it again for the appeal. What people need to know, unlike our system, in the original jury that's heard this is not a regular jury like we have in America. It's 2 judges and 6 lay people. And after the conviction in December of '09, in March of 2010, Shep, the 2 judges wrote a 427-page explanation of how they pieced the evidence together to convict her. And they said with the evidence that they had at the time, there was no other conclusion to reach than the one they reached. Now, if this judge throws out the DNA evidence and says, sorry, judges, what you based your conviction on was wrong, it didn't exist, the DNA is wrong, well, then Amanda Knox should be free to have a new trial.
Is there an explanation for how they could have made so many errors along the way. I mean, maybe the wrong murder weapon?
You know, there's an old saying in our business that oftentimes an investigation is supposed to be deductive reasoning. You look at the evidence, you look at everything, and that leads you to a suspect. But oftentimes you say, this is my suspect, and now I'm going to put the bullseye around the suspect. The prosecutor in this case from day one thought he had the right girl, came up with these crazy ideas as to the cults and this, that, and the other.
None of which were ever proved.
And none of which, quite frankly, were relevant, reliable. What we're talking about here is evidence, and the only evidence that they had was the DNA evidence, which now these court-appointed experts have said.
Got it. But it sounded to a lot of observers in this case like they were just not too happy with a little American girl having what they consider to be weird sex over there up in Italy.
Look, I know that that's what the claims were. I also know that the one guy who was convicted, Shep, his DNA is all over the place.
Yeah, was. But where was Amanda Knox's DNA?
Well,
on the murder weapon that may not be the murder weapon?
Correct. And look, if you were going to be honest about having this conversation, it's on a knife that's in the kitchen where she lived, and presumably she was cutting a piece of prosciutto, gabagol, that day, and her DNA could be all over the murder weapon. Honestly so. But, Sheppard, as we've known for all these cases we've covered, an appeals court is reluctant to absolutely let somebody walk out when 2 judges and 6 lay people wrote a 427-page decision as to why they believe she's guilty.
Except there's a critical difference, and you brought this up the last time we talked about this case, which is that in Italian law, the appellate judge can basically try the whole case all over again.
Sure, why not? Just let Noxie just rot over there. It's fine.
But you see how we refer to her, Foxy Noxie?
I just said Knox.
It became...
They're the ones over there in the Italian media who gave this young American woman this name.
Well, wait a minute. What about the English media? Because it's a young woman.
The British media?
The British media. Because, you know, they're very, very...
Yeah, they're out there.
Well, it's their country person who died.
I know.
So obviously they have an absolute right. And now her parents are going to be there at the verdict. And that judge, if he's going to let this young woman who's convicted of killing another young woman go, he's going to have to look at the parents of the woman who's deceased and say, sorry, you know, we messed up real bad and we put the wrong guy in jail.
A wrongful conviction is not going to bring this woman back. So
correct.
2 wrongs certainly are going to make a right here.
Obviously, but, you know, they need to get to the bottom of this thing, and it sounds like they're trying to do that now. Randy, Arthur, thank you.